All right, welcome everybody. We don't know what we're doing because this is our first shot at this. It's my name is Daniel Vacanti. The other gentleman, as you probably don't know, is Prateek Singh. My apologies for including him in this. But we thought that we would just sit around and drink some whiskey and talk about random topics of the day. So maybe we should start with that. So Prateek, what would you choose for today?
Well, initially, I'd want to talk a little bit about Monte Carlo and get people kind of reacquainted with what we already know about it and up to speed with what we're thinking about it now. But I recently saw a tweet from you about story points. So obviously that's front and center of your mind. So well, why don't we talk about story points a little bit?
We can talk about story points, but I want to talk about what you're drinking first. Obviously, you're starting right off by you not listening to me. So let's see. Why don't you show everybody what you're drinking?
So I'm having an Abernard, which is Speyside sherry cask. It's cask strength of about 15. It's 59.9%. So I don't think I'm going to need more than a couple of those for tonight. But talking to you, I might need more than that.
Yeah, you will. All right, so I chose also a cask strength. Everybody, hopefully that's in focus. Cask strength Ben Rinnes. It's a 15-year-old. It's in a red wine cask, 54.8%. Also, yes, 54.8%. So single cask strength Ben Rinnes for me. And you can see, I don't know if everybody can see this. It's nice. It's nice, kind of almost a rosé color for mine.
This is a little darker. I mean, for especially probably matured in the cask for a little while.
Yep.
Right. Okay.
All right.
Cheers.
So cheers, everybody. Cheers.
All right. I believe this is supposed to be a 2-drink minimum video.
Probably. All right. So story points. I mean, I don't know. Do you want to kick us off, or shall I? Shall I talk about what really kind of?
Go for it. Go for what you've got front and center.
So the thing that I've got front and center is I do not pretend to be any type of Scrum expert. I have learned a lot about Scrum over the past 3 or so years, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because I think me, like many people who don't really understand Scrum or don't know Scrum, have this assumption, and it's a false assumption as it turns out, that story points are not only a part of Scrum, but they have been for quite some time. But if you go and do the research, there is, as far as I can tell, and somebody out there in TV land, if you correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I can tell, story points have never been a part of Scrum, right? They've never been in the Scrum Guide. They've never been, as part of the Scrum Guide. Preached as a proper practice for the Scrum. You certainly can use them in Scrum, but they've never been actually a mandatory, if you will, a mandatory part of Scrum. And so what got me going is I'm running up against this this Scrum implementation. A friend of mine let me know about the Scrum implementation that he's going through, and the consulting firm that they've got in there has got them. Is trying to do a whole Scrum transformation, and they're saying as part of Scrum you have to do story points, and so they're mandating that they do story points as part of their Scrum implementation. So that got me fired up. So I fired a couple tweets about it because here it is, 2020, the year 2020, right? We're supposed to have flying cars, but instead of flying cars, we're talking about story points in Scrum. So that's where I am.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think it was probably 2 years ago when you first started reacquainting yourself with Scrum or really acquainting yourself with Scrum that you mentioned to me that story points are nowhere to be found in Scrum, and I went back and looked at the whole Scrum Guide, and there was no mention of them. So it is a myth that they go hand in hand.
Yeah, but I mean the thing is. And and we probably need a 2-drink minimum of this because just any aspect of story points that you take, and it is going to sound like I'm bashing story points because I am, right? I'm not. I want to be clear. I'm not bashing Scrum again because this is not Scrum, but I am bashing because anything you think about is story points in terms of complexity as a good predictor of cycle time, which it isn't. Using Fibonacci series as a proper math approach, whatever thing, right? I mean, any aspect of story points that you think about is just bad. It's bad. It's bad from assumptions perspective. It's bad from a practice perspective. It's just, and so that's why in my tweet I said, I believe that it's set. Story points in general have set, the Agile community or the Agile industry, however you want to say it, back 10 to 20 years because we're anchored in all of these just really bad notions.
Yeah, it's what's my pet peeve with them is more of when people talk about story points, they never talk about the assumptions behind story points. It's the whole because math. Just because I did math must mean that I'm right.
Did you ever make that T-shirt, by the way? You said
yeah, I think we need multiple copies of those going around. Yeah, because it just if I estimate something, I'm not even talking about the variance in that estimation. I'm not talking about how it correlates to actual time. I'm not talking about, and furthermore, I'm adding up these estimates that have all these variations within them. I'm never talking about how that affects the eventual outcome,
right.
How wrong I can be.
Right.
You were going to say something?
Well, I mean, I was going to move on to the next point, but you keep going if you want to rant.
Well, I was actually going to move on too, which was to say that the thing that I always hear though when we talk about story points is the actual number is not that important. Well, if we put aside the whole velocity conversation for a bit, the actual number is not important. The analysis behind figuring out how this thing will be done and all that, that's the more important part.
Yeah, it's the conversation that's important. This is where, funny enough, that's where I was going to go too, but keep going. Yeah.
Yeah, but for me, yes, the conversation is important. I get that. Gaining an understanding of the problem we are trying to solve is important. But there are better ways to do that, at least for me. Not throwing an estimated Fibonacci number at it. You could still have the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, whenever somebody says, yeah, it's the conversation that's important, and we need to understand what this thing is about. What drives me nuts about that is, number one, they're usually conflating two concepts, right? Estimation and analysis, as you were just saying, right? And so I don't know how much time we want to spend talking about how bad story points are for estimates. Hopefully everybody can disagree with that, but we can talk about that later. But so if you throw the estimation part aside, and even if you get people to agree, we can throw the estimation part aside, then they always come back to, well, but it's the conversation that's important. And I absolutely agree. There are much better ways to do analysis than, is this a 2-point story or is this a 3-point story? Not only better, but more effective, and probably leads to better discussions, better understanding. Because the last thing I think that you probably need to know about a story in terms of its analysis is how complex it is. In the great scheme of things, complexity just does not matter, at least in my experience anyway.
Well, that's where the other thing that which we often, when we run the penny game or something like that, we often talk about at the end where we've asked people to estimate things. And we go, your estimation took longer than it would have to actually do the work. A 3-hour sprint planning session, including story points, I'm sure you could do much more efficient things. Instead of spending all that time estimating, we could have probably started 1 or 2 of those stories and found out where we were headed.
Yeah. So I mean, maybe instead of focusing on the negative of don't do story points, which really everybody, if you're listening to this, you should not be doing story points. Maybe we should talk about some replacement strategies, if you will, for story points, because I think even more than that, even more than people not understanding story points, I think people don't have a good grasp of what that replacement should be. You hear people talking about counts of stories, and that kind of frustrates me too, because counts of stories is only part of the solution. And it's a very, very, very small part of the solution. So I don't know if you want to start talking about that. If we don't do story points, what do we do?
Yeah, it was interesting. Like when you fired off that tweet, there were at least 3 or 4 responses there going, okay, what's the alternative then? It's a completely fair question. What is the alternative? And we have long been believers in let's actually start this thing and find out how big is it, and if it is bigger than the usual amount of time it takes us to get things done, let's break this down into smaller pieces. We drive out that uncertainty by doing that work,
So
figuring out
if it's bigger than the average thing that we've done before. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Thanks for baiting me with the flaw of averages. Well, what we've always talked about is figure out what that risk level is that you're comfortable with. Are you okay taking risks, or having only a 15% risk or only a 30% risk? And based on that, figure out what's your 70th or your 85th percentile that you're comfortable committing to. So plot out all your stories, find out how long 85% of my stories take, and then go, hey, I'm picking this thing up. Do you think this is going to be bigger than that 85th? Just a quick, is it smaller than, let's say 85% of our stories take 10 days or less. Can I get this done in 10 days or less? The answer is no. Well, let's break it up. The answer is yes, let's flow it through. And more importantly, and this is, I think, some of the stuff that you've been talking about of late, where probably the most important metric we don't talk about is work item age. As things are flowing through, when we figure out this is going to be bigger, can we break it up even then?
Yeah, that's the key. Yeah, just because even that upfront estimate is just not enough, right? There's going to be more that we need to do. But and I want to come back to that. But let's talk about. Let's unpack a couple of things that you said there, because 2 minutes and 18 seconds, Prateek, kind of glossed over everything, and I think we need to do just a little bit of deeper dive.
You have 2 books that I just summarized in 2 minutes.
Yeah. That we need to that we need to spend just a little bit more time on, so that people can kind of understand. And you reminded me, I don't know if you remember, it was one of my, I don't know if it wasn't the first week that I was at Ultimate Software, it was the second week. And remember, we were talking to, the head of product strategy.
Yep.
And, she was complaining about, she kept getting all of these estimates in story points. And I would argue that's probably the fundamental problem with story points, just in general. The fundamental problem with story points is it's not speaking the language of our customers. Mm-hmm. Our customers think in terms of elapsed time. Our customers think in terms of when will it be done and how long is it going to take for you to get this done. They're not thinking in terms of relative complexity. They're not thinking in terms of story points and things like that. And you could see her in her mind whenever a team would hand her, say, hey, this is going to be an 8-point story. She was in her mind having to go through and kind of do that math to convert 8 points to.
Yeah, she literally said that. I remember. Yep. we were sitting at that little wine bar having that conversation. Yep. She literally said that when that team says 10 points, I know it'll be 3 weeks.
It can't be 10 points because Fibonacci. Because math.
Oh, sorry.
Come on, Fibonacci.
Well, isn't 8 plus 2?
Oh shit. I don't know if we can cuss on this. I don't know if we can swear on that. It's your choices are 8 or 11 here. So yeah. I mean, so to me that's kind of the fundamental problem. So how do we replace story points with something that our customers can immediately understand? And what you were proposing there, whether everybody out there picked it up or not, what you were proposing there was actually going in and tracking. If what our customers care about is how long it takes to get stuff done, that's exactly what we should be tracking. In terms of data that we should be collecting, we should be collecting the data around how long, as stories go through our process, or epics or whatever, as these items go through our process, how long are they taking? And based on an understanding of kind of like you said, the variability of all those items flowing through our process, we can now start having a good understanding of risk and how much risk we're willing to live with. Do we want to plan to do we want to be wrong 50% of the time? Do we want to be wrong only 50%? Do we want to only be wrong 15%? Do we only want to be wrong 5% of the time? And now we can start having intelligent conversations around, okay, well, if we're only willing to live with a 15% risk of being wrong, this is what it's going to look like. So I don't know if you want to say something about that.
Well, we've both mentioned it, but we haven't kind of dived into it enough, which is at the end of the day, even story points and velocity and all that stuff is a way to eliminate risk. That's what we're trying to do.
Yep.
That's that at the end of the day, that's what with story points, with burn down charts, velocity, all that fun stuff, we're trying to eliminate risk. If there is an easier way, if there is a simpler and more customer speak way of eliminating risk, why not use that as opposed to a place where you're asking developers to figure out an estimate on how many story points something is.
Well, so this is something that's now encroaching on something I know that's near and dear to both our hearts, and that's the whole idea of risk management and understanding uncertainty and embracing uncertainty and things like that. We should probably save that for another.
Yeah, probably should.
Yeah, I mean that's going to require an Auchintosh at least.
That will have to. Yeah.
When we go, but you know, I hate to say it, and I think we're recording, so I shouldn't say this out loud. But you're absolutely right. It really comes down to an understanding of risk and how well are we going to manage risk, because the whole idea of Agile, I would argue, the whole idea of flow, is how do we make better decisions under uncertainty. And I hate to break it to you, story points ain't it, right? You know, they're just not. And I'd love to know how much money has been made selling the snake oil that is story points. I mean, whoever came up with it, you know. I believe Ron Jeffries on Twitter has admitted, he's like, I may be the one who invented them, and if I did, I'm sorry. You know, kudos to him for actually apologizing and recognizing, you know. But there's so many other agilistas out there who are still pushing this thing that I think are just detrimental to the exact, you know, cause that you're putting forth, and that is how do we really understand risk and deal with that risk in a more mature, intelligent way.
Yeah, and not just how much money has been made selling the snake oil, also how much money have we spent with all these 6-figure salary developers sitting around arguing whether it's 2 points or 5 points.
Hold on, is that Fibonacci? Yeah, okay, you're good.
Yeah, I'm good.
You're good. The lower down my whiskey gets, the less.
I know. Well, and I think we haven't even touched on the bad math part of adding the stuff together. Actually, we've touched on it, but we haven't explored it enough of adding a 2 and a 5 and a 3 and coming up with a 10 or whatever. That just blows my mind at this point. Yeah, I got that right. I do remember this is way early on when we had first when I had first started leading a Scrum team. One of my tech leads, he was like, where's my 4? I want my 4. Why did you take away my 4?
Yeah, I agree. I know. Do you want to pontificate on like cardinal and ordinal numbers and all that?
Yeah, yeah. It's what story? If we're talking about relative complexity, think about it as, to me, like think about 1, 3, and 5 or whatever as small, medium, and large. Let's forget numbers. Let's just essentially small, medium, and large. You won't add 2 mediums and be like, oh, this is a large now, or you won't add 5 smalls and be like, this is a large now. That's essentially the problem with adding these points together. You're really talking about t-shirt sizes and then adding them together. There is such range of how big a 1 is and how big a 3 is that adding them together just doesn't work. And I hear it multiple times that all this stuff averages out. Again, we're falling into, well, plugging Dr. Sam Savage's book again, because we love doing that, flaw of averages. Again, falling into that trap.
We should be taking notes. So we're talking about risk management, uncertainty, flaw of averages, I think is another topic. Monte Carlo is yet another one. I don't know.
Monte Carlo.
Now that we're under lockdown, I don't know that I have enough whiskeys to get us through all these things, but we really we should be taking notes. The whiteboard behind you is actually good. Maybe we should keep it running.
Oh, yeah.
of
Well, I do.
topic and whiskey required, right? And by the way, for everybody who's watching, it's whiskey without an E, right? We
Well,
might
at
sneak in whiskey
times,
with an E. Yeah,
yeah, at
we
times
might.
there could be whiskey with an E,
Yeah.
because it's easier for me to find that around here than it is to find good whiskey without the E.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
But as Prateek is writing, kind of following on the bad math, or if you're in the UK, bad maths, that is story points. The other big problem with a 1 versus a 2 versus a 5 versus a and let's not even talk about how the Fibonacci sequence just like kind of goes away after, what is it, after 21 or something
20?
like that? I don't know, whatever it is, right? And all of a sudden it's like, a million, right?
We
I
gave
don't
up
know.
100 now.
we give up, yeah. All right, so forgetting all that, the biggest thing, and this is maybe the elephant in the room, and of course this is where our flow bias is going to show through, is the biggest thing that determines complexity, whether it's a 1 or a 2 or a 3, whatever, is not the story itself, but it's how many other things you're trying to work on while you're trying to work on that one. That one might look really, really easy, but if you're trying to work on 20 other things while you're working on that one thing, all of a sudden that 1 point story becomes really, really hard, really, really complex, takes a really long time. And that's the bigger determinant of how long something's going to take, or our estimate. It's not what we think the complexity is up front. It's how many other things we're working on at the same time.
So I'm hearing Little's Law for the future.
Well, yeah, that's another one, Little's Law. So wait, Monte Carlo risk management, Little's Law. I thought there was one more, wasn't there? We'll have to go check the tape. I think there was one.
We'll check the tape. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure there was.
We're not recording this for anyone else. We're recording this for us to go back.
For posterity. Yeah. Yeah, I'm pretty sure there was one more, but whatever. So anyway, okay. So going back to the point that you made is, let's talk about, going back to replacements. And the thing you mentioned was age. And so I don't know if you can touch a little bit more on, we've got this upfront estimate. We think, 85% of our stories in the past took 8 days or less to complete. And this item that's coming in, we think it's probably going to take within that range, within that 1 to 8 day range. Does that mean we're done? That we just pull it in, we start working on it, and that's it? Are we done?
No, and that's where as we were talking about earlier, the work item age comes into play. Where sure, we said this was going to be 10 days, but as a developer went in, started coding, started looking around, said, yeah, I know I said 10 days, but these 2 ACs, I can probably get them done in 2. But this third one, that's where most of that 10 days is. At that point, I think it's imperative. It's for the sanctity of the system. It's necessary that we raise our hand and go, let's split this into 2 things. I'm going to get these 2 done, move it along, and then we're going to, as a team, pull in the other story, which has a third AC, and work it through. Seen this so many times, but there was actually, you mentioned 8 days as an example there. They're literally, I'm looking at a story for a team that does things in 8 days or less. They had 3 ACs in it. The third one was some UI funky magic thing, and that's exactly what happened. They got done with the first 2 within a day, but the third one took them 14 days to figure out.
By the way, if anybody, I don't know if Prateek said it, when we say ACs, we're talking about acceptance criteria, just for the record. Well, yeah, absolutely. And this is that concept of, and I think what we're hitting on is yet another problem with story points is a lot of people, they'll do their planning poker or whatever up front, and they'll say, okay, this is everything that fits in the sprint. Okay, go, right? And what they don't understand, and again, this is really kind of from a flow perspective, is your job isn't finished at that point. It's just beginning, right? It has just started. And once we work on that story, the second that we see, like you said, maybe one AC is out of whack, or maybe we crack the story open and this thing is much harder than we thought it was, whatever. The second that we get that more information, we are required as a team to get together and talk about, okay, we've got this new information. what do we need to do? Do we need to break it up? Do we need to split it? Do we need to split out that one AC into a different story? Do we need to swarm or mob on it? Do we need to maybe kick it out of the process because, well, we thought it was this thing, but it looks like it's this other thing, and that's probably not what we want to be working on right now. So let's kick it out and let's work something else in. And I think that's where so many teams get into trouble is they think, well, we've done this upfront estimation, we've done this upfront analysis. Well, that means we have to work on it. It has to move through the system just like that, intact. And
there's some form of sunk cost fallacy happening there when we've spent the effort doing this, so we should keep it this way. Is that kind of interesting? You mentioned the new information piece, and we'll probably talk about this when we talk about Monte Carlo a little bit more. Is you're absolutely right. When we get new information, which a developer opening up a story and finding out this landmine is new information, we should be reacting to it. It's how the National Weather Service forecast hurricanes. It's how right now governments are reacting to new data from testing and whatever numbers are coming at them from the COVID crisis. We should be doing the same thing on a daily basis. As this thing is aging, as we're finding out more about it, we should be reacting to it.
Yeah, and absolutely. And this is getting to the whole concept of continuous forecasting. And this is, to me, this is the primary reason why, looping us right back around to something we said right at the beginning, the primary reason why just even counts of stories is not good enough. Sure, yes, we can track that we did 5 stories last sprint, or 6 stories 2 sprints before, or 10 stories 3 sprints before, whatever. Yes, we can track those counts, but that is very, very, very limited information. It's partial information, and the much, much, much better information is, as we are working on it just in time, we need to constantly be comparing that age, as you said, constantly comparing that age to how long it's taken us to complete stories in the past, regardless how many things we got done, right? If 85% of the time it took us 8 days to get stories done, and this one looks like it's going to be, it's up around 6 or 7 or even over 8 days, we need to do something about it. And counts of stories ain't going to help us with that, right? We need other information to be able to process that action.
Yeah, you're hit about something else that's hidden in the little slaw thing too, because you were talking about WIP earlier and how that's a great determinant of how long things will take. You could have a limited WIP system, but if those things just keep aging, you are going to be very unpredictable. Yep. So even whether you're doing story points, or you're doing counts of stories, or you're just limited with flow system, you still need to pay attention to that age.
Yeah, I'm potentially smelling another topic here, but absolutely. I mean, so many people think, especially when we talk about Kanban, because it probably sounds like Prateek and I, for everybody out there, Prateek and I are advocating, we're just advocating for Kanban. And that's kind of true, but it's kind of not. What we're really advocating for is just kind of basic flow principles. I think that's the thing that I think that people need to understand. A lot of people think, well, with Kanban, as long as you limit work in progress, that fixes everything. And that's just not true, right? Again, that's just the start. And it, generally speaking, usually isn't a very good start. I don't know, we can't get into it now, but again, that's something you should talk about, is how your philosophy has evolved over time in terms of limiting work in progress. But limiting work in progress is just a thing. If we're not managing that aging, if we're not actively managing those items as they're flowing through process, you limit work in progress all you want, you're not going to get predictability.
And that again brings us full circle back to the reason you're looking for predictability is to manage risk. And you get predictability by what we have been sideways hinting at and calling right-sizing your work and limiting WIP. Those are the things that generate predictability in the system. And that's the one, if I am to give story points credit on anything, the one credit I will give story points would be, it got teams into the habit of saying, we are going to limit the amount of stuff we're going to pull into this sprint or this iteration. It was a sideways method of limiting WIP at the sprint level. And if teams have seen gains from that, great. I mean, I think that's one thing I'll give Story Points credit, is it got people into the habit of limiting the amount of stuff you work on.
Yeah. Unfortunately, like I said, it brought all these other bad habits too, as well as we got to the end of the sprint and we got work done on the story. The story's not done. So what we're going to do is we're going to artificially split the story so that we can get credit for the points that we got done toward our velocity and things like that.
Yeah, that's the one thing we didn't even talk about, which was all the dogma around story points, which is, it's amazing. I visit the on Reddit. I go to the Agile Reddit every once in a while, and half the questions are, do you assign points to bugs? What do you do with a story that's unfinished at the end of a sprint? How do you account for points for that? It's all about how do you deal with points, story points for these random situations that happen every day. And so the dogma around this kind of is as bad as the math around it is.
Yeah, we should have that's what this should debate about. Which is worse, the dogma or the math? Right? I don't know. I really don't know. But so I don't know about you. I don't think you've been drinking as fast as I have.
I haven't.
I'm actually empty. So I don't know. I kind of feel like we've maybe, I don't know if you can say it. We've beat this dead horse. Can you say that anymore? I don't know.
We've emptied this well.
We've should we say the Canadian expression?
I don't think so.
So I don't know. Do you have anything else to add?
No, I can
certainly pour myself another one, but
I can definitely do that as well. But again, as you said, we don't need to beat this dead horse.
All right. So I guess to sum up, story points bad. Replace it with not only counts of stories. That's certainly a good place to start. But more importantly, I think, than counts of stories is just track how long it takes you to get your story or your items, just any items. I don't want to keep saying stories, but just any item that's flowing through your process. Track how long it takes, have an understanding, that whole kind of spectrum of understanding of how long it takes you to get items finished. And then constantly be comparing the age of items in progress against how long it has taken us to complete stuff in the past. And when you get information that stuff isn't flowing the way that it should be, take action, right? Let's break it up. Let's swarm on it. Let's mob it. Let's kick it out of the process. Let's do whatever we can to make sure that items are flowing through as predictable as possible. So I'll let you have the last word before we sign off, Prateek, if there's anything that you want to add.
Yeah, no, I'm actually gonna echo what you just said and use your words to say it's not like you become predictable, it's that you do predictability. Yeah. So doing this stuff on a daily basis, sizing things and watching flow, limiting WIP, all that stuff.
Right. Yeah. Actually, that one I gotta give credit where credit is due. That's a shout out to my good friend Bennett Ballett, who came up with that. He talked about how predictability is a verb, right? You nice. Actually you have to do it. It's like Nike, just do it. So cheers to you, Bennett. Thanks for that. And I guess that's it. I don't know. Went well for our first one. And we'll choose one of those topics behind you there, Prateek, for our next one, probably next week.
And do we invite questions? We should invite some questions.
We should. We definitely should.
Yeah, we should hit us up on Twitter.
And we should talk about what's on deck. I've got this nice sherry cask Auchentoshan, 19-year-old Auchentoshan.
Oh, nice. Yeah. I have the Auchentoshan downstairs that actually you gave me. So that's where I'm gonna go next.
I don't know. That may be on deck, or we might surprise you and come up with something else. So anyway,
we might add the E to the whiskey next time. We'll see.
So thanks to everybody for letting us babble and listening to us babble for the past 45 minutes or so. Hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time on whatever the hell the name of this thing is, if we come up with a name. So
whiskey and something.
Whiskey and something. As good as any. All right. Good night, everybody.